Welcome back to Lit by the Fire. So glad you're here with us this evening as we continue Barbie McSwain's story, The Mountain. We have been on quite an adventure up this mountain, and I think it has taken a few turns we did not expect. And as the story continues now, I'm really eager to see what happens to Johann and Michael as they perhaps put these new swords to practice and as they discover the secret or the mystery of this dragon that has been guarding the treasure. It's unclear. We shall pick up the story at chapter 16. An enemy goes on the prowl. Abernathy Sullivan's fist pounded the table. Worn mugs and plates rattled. Milligrub cowered in his chair, sinking lower until only his large eyes could be seen above the table. Now they have swords! Do you have any idea what they can do with those? But they don't know how to use them. You said they would need to know how to use them. Well, they're learning now, aren't they? And he's made his proclamation. We're going to have to do something more than have him over for dinner. The old man's forehead wrinkled and his gray eyes glared up through heavy eyebrows. Johann can't get any closer to that treasure. What are you going to do? Squeaked Milligrub. They're headed toward the cave. It's time they run into some real trouble. The large man rose from his chair in the treehouse. He reached his hand toward the wall and a hole opened in the wood. As the man stepped through the opening, his head melted into his shoulders, which expanded into a scraggly mane. His back hunched, and his hands became large paws and reached for the ground. As the tree wall closed up, a mangy and thin lion stood on the path in front of the tree. Opening his great mouth, he let out a roar that echoed off the mountain wall. The lion lumbered up the path into the darkness of the forest. Every few yards, the beast let out a roar that shook the ground. Tufts of matted hair stuck out from the dark mane. Its long tail swished and dragged through the dusty path, stirring up smoky clouds in its wake. The lion prowled deeper into the forest until it came to a large pile of gray, jagged rocks. It leaped to the top of the rocks and let out another roar, looking down into a dark, rocky canyon. Evergreen shrubs and small trees littered the sides of the canyon. The lion padded in and out of the spindly trunks, growling. As it passed each tree, an armored soldier emerged out of the bark of the tree and followed the lion. The soldiers were not large, but tall and thin. Each wore a brown breastplate fashioned from tree bark and was armed with a large pointed staff. A dark green helmet covered each head and reached down between expressionless eyes to cover the soldier's nose. They marched after the lion, following it into the canyon. Reaching the level but rocky ground of the canyon floor, a company of about 30 soldiers stood forming loose ranks. The lion lumbered into a large flat rock, morphing again into Abernathy Sullivan. The large old man stood before a granite rock shaped like a throne, breathing heavily. As the man eased himself into the granite chair and rested against its high back, the soldiers all fell to one knee and saluted by clapping a fist to their breast. Abernathy Sullivan raised a casual hand to release his small army from their reverence. Another seeker is on his way to the cave. A worried grumbling spread through the troops. I needn't tell you he must be stopped immediately. There are 2 of them. They'll be coming over Broken Pass soon. It won't be difficult to spot them there. You know what to do. But, he paused and took another raspy breath, they have their swords. Now alarm started to overtake the company. Abernathy raised both hands to call for quiet. He looked down, smiling and shaking his head. There's no need for alarm. They don't really know how to use them yet, and they certainly don't know what they can do." He looked out over the group, his smile fading. "Just the same, be sure to, aha," he cleared his throat, "steer clear of their points. Wouldn't want to lose anyone to an amateur. Now, be off." In one movement, they saluted their leader again, beating fists against their breasts, then turned and ran up the canyon wall like so many cockroaches until they scrambled over the edge and disappeared over the top. Abernathy Sullivan watched as his tree soldiers left on their mission. He started up from his throne, his large hands once again reaching out as paws for the ground. His shoulders shrugged into a mane, and his cumbersome body melted into a low-slung lion belly. The mangy lion lumbered his way up the jagged rocks, back to where he had come from, his tail dragging the ground, stirring up clouds of dust. The tree soldiers silently climbed and marched their way down the mountain path until the path came to an abrupt stop where a sheer cliff dropped hundreds of feet above rushing waters. A giant tree had split lengthwise and placed across the chasm to connect it to the forest on the other side. The rounded underside of the tree fit snugly and securely into hollowed-out niches on either side of the cliff. This was anchored by boulders. Moss grew on these large rocks, making a green carpeted entrance to the bridge. Although the tree was wide, smooth, and secure, it had no handrails, which at that height made for a treacherous crossing. Half the company trooped across the bridge, moving one at a time. The only sound was the rushing water below. Once on the other side, both groups of soldiers silently went to work, dislodging the moss-covered boulders from the secure niches. Working from each end of the log, they rocked it back and forth, lifting the ends until great clumps of earth began falling from around the ends and descended silently into the rushing water. They lifted up the ends of the log and set them precariously on the edges of the cliff. Satisfied that the bridge was sufficiently sabotaged, the soldiers on the far side of the chasm began to venture back across to join their comrades on the near side. The first one moved slowly onto the log, his splintery arms outstretched for balance. When he was more than midway across, a second soldier stepped onto the flat log and began moving across. The curved bottom of the log teetered and rocked from side to side, and the imbalanced soldiers walking across it both fell off either side of the bridge. Had they been able to cry out, the sound would have died in the raging waters. The surprised soldiers on both sides of the chasm looked at one another. The party on the near side shrugged sheepishly at the stranded party. Smiling at their good fortune, the near side company turned abruptly and ran back to the safety of their canyon. The stranded company watched their fleeing comrades, bewildered by their abandonment. Finally realizing that no one else could venture across the unsafe passage, they turned to make their way around to their canyon another way. Chapter 17, Sabotaged Sabotage. "Oh, this path is awfully narrow," Johann observed. "It's hard to keep from stepping off of it." Michael deliberately placed one foot in front of the other. Thick foliage surrounded them on either side. Ahead, a small brown rabbit hopped onto the path and paused, his eyes wide and alert. The boys kept walking, and the rabbit sprang from the path and disappeared into the undergrowth. High above the trees, a ribbon of blue sky mirrored the path. Michael pointed at the ribbon and announced, "Look up there!" The boys stopped and gazed at two eagles gliding above them. Their massive dark wings held steady as they circled and dipped. Oh, wish we could be up there. They can see what's ahead. All I see is your knapsack, and you're about to lose your bedroll. Johann shrugged and kept walking. The muscles in his legs began to cramp. He hunched his shoulders to move his pack a little higher and alleviate the weight on his back. It didn't help. He was about to suggest they stop when the path opened onto a small clearing. The gray rock wall of the mountain stood on their right, and ahead was a large chasm, a sheer cliff that dropped straight down to a narrow, rushing river. Somewhere in time past, the mountain had been pulled apart a few feet to form this small abyss that separated them from the other side. A large split tree lay precariously across the void. The boys dropped their packs, leaned against the mountain wall, and slid down to their seats. Johann grabbed his flagon and took a few deep swigs of water. He passed it to Michael, who gulped greedily. Water splashed past his mouth and dribbled down his neck. Johann sat resting his elbows on his knees. Beads of sweat sprouted on his forehead as he studied the trunk that teetered across the chasm. I guess that's the only way across, Johann offered. Looks like it, Michael agreed. Johann leaned forward and looked up at the top of the rock wall he rested against. He could see large boulders less than 20 feet above him. Maybe we could make our way up there, he said, pointing to the rocks. Then we could see if there's another way. Both boys rested against the rock to contemplate this new proposal. They were weary from the morning walk. The sun was high above, reminding them it was time for a noon meal. Michael was about to pull a loaf of bread from his pack when they heard a creaking above them. They looked up. The boulders were shaking. Tiny pebbles and rocks sprayed down on their heads. They scrambled on their hands and knees back toward the path. Boulders came crashing down, bouncing onto the tree bridge. One large boulder bounced next to where Johann had been sitting. Another heavy boulder fell into the middle of the trunk, snapping it in two. The tree bridge folded up like a stick and fell into the river below. Johann looked up at the top of the ridge in time to see the back of the good master walking away, brushing the palms of his hands against his sides to shake off dirt. Johann rubbed his eyes and looked up. The space was empty. Are you okay? Michael squeaked. Johann continued staring at the top of the rock wall. He shook his head clear of his incredulous thoughts. Yeah, I guess. The boys crawled to the edge of the cliff, flattened out like lizards, and peered into the chasm far below. Clearly, there was no way to cross it now. The gorge, though not terribly wide, was too wide to jump across. Their only course was retreat. As they picked up their packs, Michael retrieved the hunk of bread and ripped it in two. He handed one piece to Johann and clenched his piece between his teeth as he fit the pack onto his tired shoulders. Did we miss another path? Let's get off this cliff and rest, Michael said. Johann looked back up at the rock, then at Michael, and started to say something. What? Michael muttered with a mouthful of bread. Johann shook his head. Nothing. Thought I saw something. I'm sure it was nothing. As Johann trudged back to the dark, narrow path, chewing on the bread, doubt was chewing its way into his thoughts. He stumbled but caught his balance. The ribbon of blue above them became suddenly dark gray, and a deep rumbling swelled, then crashed above them. They looked behind at the cliff. Beyond the chasm, a dark forest swayed in a strong wind. Lightning flashed across the sky, scrawling thin white-hot fingers through the clouds. Then a bolt of lightning shot down into the trees across the chasm. The sound that ricocheted back to the boys sent them tumbling. Once again, they were a tangle of arms and legs as each tried to climb over the other to a place of safety. But they had nowhere to go. Finally, they flattened themselves on the ground and covered their heads with shaking arms. They could hear a great wrenching and crashing. More lightning cracked and thunder shook the ground. A long creaking, then a crash. The ground shook once more. Then silence. Johann peered out from under his elbows. Michael was drawn up in a tight ball beside him, pinned down by his knapsack, his arms wrapped around his head. Johann raised his head cautiously. A huge tree now lay across the chasm. Its branches and green foliage trembled slightly in a soft breeze. The treetop extended a few feet onto their side of the chasm, making a stable overpass to the other side of the mountain. Johann lifted his head, then sat back on his knees and stared at the newly felled tree, shaking his head. They stood, checking themselves for damage, but all arms and legs seemed okay. Michael pointed a shaky finger at the tree, still unable to speak. Each time he tried to form words, only frightened squeaks escaped. The tree. Johann smiled. I know. He walked to the tree and took hold of two branches to give it a good shake. Nothing moved. All right, I guess we... He stuttered. The tree was wide and solid, with plenty of branches sticking up that they could hold as they crossed easily. Johann grabbed one of these branches and gingerly stepped onto the trunk. It remained stable. He looked over his shoulder and smiled at Michael, who held his breath. Gasping and stepping, Johann began making his way across to the other side. Michael stepped up to the tree, his eyes intent on the back of his friend ahead of him. Halfway across, Johann made the mistake of looking past the makeshift bridge to the waters below and started to lose his balance. Michael froze, seeing Johann's foot slip on the side of the trunk, but Johann clung tightly to the branches and recovered his balance, pulling himself back up. He nimbly scurried the last few feet and jumped down onto solid ground. Whew, he waved to Michael. It's all right, just don't look down, he hollered. Johann watched Michael close his eyes, take a deep breath, and grasp the branches to pull himself onto the trunk. Johann fixed his eyes on Michael and yelled instructions, but he wasn't sure Michael could hear him over the rushing waters. Michael clenched his jaw, grinding his teeth as he inched his way closer. His knuckles turned white with every branch he gripped. You're doing great, Johann called. Just a few more feet. Keep looking at me. Right here. That's right. Finally, Michael arrived and jumped off the tree. His knees immediately buckled under him, and he rolled like a log over to Johann, who helped raise him to his feet. Both boys laughed in disbelief at their accomplishment and patted each other's back as they surveyed their incredible bridge. I just wish Willard Tate could have seen that, Michael said. Cripes! Johann laughed and tugged at his brave friend. Come on, let's go! They turned into the dark forest. Back across the chasm, a low, rumbling growl rose from behind the remaining boulders on the cliff. A tuft of matted dark hair moved behind the rock. Then a thin lion leapt onto the boulder, his belly slung low. He let out an angry roar that echoed across the chasm. Chapter 18, Charlottetown. Is that more thunder? Michael looked behind him warily. The low rumbling faded into the trees. That or we have an angry lion after us. Johann's grin faded. We don't have an angry lion after us, do we? He stared at Michael. Michael shrugged. How should I know? This is your quest, remember? Muted colors of pink and gold crept into the patches of sky above them as the sun began descending. Dense forests surrounded them, offering no comfortable patch of ground for the night. Up ahead, a faint glow beckoned to the boys from beyond the trees. The path came to what appeared to be another cliff, and as they approached the crest, they saw that it meandered down a hillside to a village below. Thatched roofs atop crude shelters dotted a small, flat canyon. Thin gray smoke trailed from clay chimneys that rose out of the thatch. The boys stood surveying the tiny community. Flickering lights danced in small windows of the houses. The path wound between the homes. The boys had to pass through the village if they stayed on the path. Okay, I think we need a plan, Michael announced. To walk down a path through a village? How hard can that be? We need a plan, Michael insisted. What are you talking about? A plan for what? Johann asked. There could be will benders in those homes. The boys stood in silence. Johann cast a sideways glance at Michael, whose brow was furrowed as he studied the village. Johann looked at the inviting homes and furrowed his brow also. He even rubbed his chin with his hand, trying to stir up some thoughts, but his mind was blank. Crickets began a faint chorus that grew louder in the silence of the boys' contemplations. Johann felt a shadow move behind him and looked over his shoulder. Medwin stood behind them, grinning. You still here, boy? I thought you'd have that treasure by now. Didn't the mountain accept your pronouncement? Johann's neck flushed red as he fumbled for a reply. Oh, it did. We kept running into things. You don't say. Well, what have you run into now? You're standing here like two bumps on a pickle. What's the matter? Johann opened his mouth. He wanted to explain to Medwin that they were reasonably wary of possible dangers and even will benders. He wanted to tell him about the adventures they had encountered since they last saw him, but when he looked at the man's penetrating dark eyes, no intelligible word came out. Michael spoke first. What are you doing here, Medwin? Visiting. I come through these parts ever so often to see if anything has changed, though it never does. He looked at the boys and smiled. Why don't you boys join me for supper? You might just enjoy meeting some of the citizens of Charlottetown. And he chuckled deeply. Yep, just be what you need about now. The boys were tired and hungry. Johann hoped for some food and a place to sleep for the night. Then in the morning they would be on their way. All right. Where are you going? He queried Medwin. You see the last cottage where the path curves to the left down there? The boys followed Medwin's pointing finger, squinting at the approaching dusk. Michael said, The one with the flowers under the window? Yeah, that's the one. The couple who lives there is expecting me. Johann looked about. He cast a glance behind him over one shoulder, then the other. Medwin matched his movements, looking around before asking, You lose something, boy? Well, shouldn't we be watching for will benders? Nah, they never bother these people, Medwin assured them. Why not? No need, you'll see. Come on now, supper's almost ready. Neither boy needed to hear any more. The hope of a home-cooked meal carried them quickly down the mountainside. They raced through the village, following the path as it wound past cottages and gardens until the last cottage came into view. Fragrant smoke rose from the chimney and curled into the twilight. The windows shone like two yellow, expectant eyes. A neat cobblestone path led to the door, and colorful flowers flanked the path on both sides, an inviting welcome. Medwin watched the boys as they scampered into the village. Before following, he looked into a clump of dark trees beside him and said, You sure they're ready for this? They're ready, came the reply. Medwin shrugged. Well, you're the boss, but that boy is too green. Good master stepped out of the shadows. That's why he has you. Medwin touched his finger to his brow in a goodbye salute and followed the hungry boys. He caught up to them just as they approached the door. Medwin stepped up and knocked a staccato beat on the door. It opened abruptly, and a slight, rotund man holding a bowl of a long, curving pipe stepped out. His other arm opened wide. "Medwin, welcome! Oh, welcome!" He turned his head inside and hollered, "Mama, the traveler has arrived!" He stepped out of the doorway to make room for his wife, who was busily adjusting her apron and cap. She, too, was slightly round and beamed with rosy cheeks and a laughing smile. "Medwin, come in," she giggled. "Dinner's just about ready." "Oh, hope you don't mind, but I brought some hungry travelers with me," Medwin said, apologetically stepping aside to reveal two of the dirtiest faces the woman had seen in a long while. "Oh, my!" she exclaimed, then recovering quickly added, "Well, that's fine. That's just fine. You boys put your things right here." She motioned to a small area by the door where they could put their packs. "I'm Kinnard, and this is my husband, Judson." The boys nodded shyly and introduced themselves. The round man clapped a heavy hand on Medwin's shoulder and shook his hand enthusiastically. "Medwin, how you been?" Medwin smiled pleasantly and returned a hearty shake. "Oh, better than I deserve, I'm sure." The woman led them into a spacious room. "Papa, fetch a water pail for these fellows so they can wash up." She smiled at the boys and called back to her husband, "The big pail!" Johann followed Medwin and Michael through the room to the pail of water, gazing at a large wooden table set with plates and cups and a vase of fresh flowers. A large black cauldron hung over a fire, crackling in the hearth. Steam rose from the open pot, and the aroma of fresh herbs and garlic wafted through the room. The woman put a round of bread on the wooden slab and brought it to the table. Medwin and the boys began washing their hands and faces at the water bucket. The cold water stung Johann's face and made him shiver, but it felt good to rinse the day's dirt from his skin. The man began pouring something from a pitcher into the cups around the table. Mama, I think you've outdone yourself tonight. She's been simmering that stew since the sun was up and walloping my hand with her big wooden spoon every time I went for a taste." "Well, it's for our company. Boys, fetch your plates and come on over here," she instructed, standing by the hearth. The boys lined up their plates outstretched, and she ladled a generous serving of stew into each. They returned to the table and began tearing chunks of bread from the round loaf as the others were served. Once everyone was seated, Judson raised his cup. "To friends and travelers, may they be ever welcome." "Hear, hear!" Gaynard agreed, raising her cup. Following Medwin's lead, the boys raised their cups and nodded in agreement. Then everyone took a sip. The liquid had a pleasant taste and warmed Johann's throat when he swallowed it. Mama cider is the best in these parts," Judson proclaimed. The famished boys smiled and ate while Medwin and Judson swapped stories. Then Judson turned to the boys. "What brings you to these parts, boys?" Johann started to open his mouth, but noticed that Medwin was staring hard at him as he raised his cup to his mouth. Medwin's brows furrowed slightly as he continued to stare at him, so Johann said nothing. Michael cleared his throat and said, "We wanted to see the good master." "You're not looking for that blasted treasure, are you?" "Now, Papa, don't get started on that." No, I didn't start anything, Mama. They'd be the ones looking for it, not me. I know better than to go off hunting for things that don't exist." "How do you know it doesn't exist?" Johann asked. "Oh, it's just a children's story, Johann," Judson insisted. "And the good master don't exist except in the imaginations of the young and gullible." Johann looked at Medwin and waited for him to correct Judson, but the man continued eating in silence. Johann cleared his throat, and Medwin peered at him without raising his head. Johann nodded toward Judson, his eyes clearly begging Medwin to say something. Medwin swallowed and took a long drink from his cup. Judson, why don't you tell the boys this children's story? Johann detected a slight sarcasm in Medwin as he said, children's. Okay, I will. Long ago, before anyone was in the world, the legend goes, there came a big battle in the heavens. Abidin rose up against the Great One who created the world and whose name no one knows. Who's Abidin? Johann and Michael asked. Some high up one in the heavens. He's had lots of power, don't you know, but Abidin wanted all the power for himself. The Great One, instead of fighting, banished him to the world. Then the Great One created all the people. Biden, to retaliate, decided he would destroy everything the Great One who had created, including his people. So the Great One sent mighty warriors to destroy Biden and protect his people, but one by one, Biden defeated them. It seemed Biden grew more powerful after every battle. Finally, Great One sent his son. Now, Biden could take any form he wanted, and he did this often so no one could recognize him and kill him. So the son came looking for Biden, who had turned himself into a slithering, poisonous snake. He slithered and he slunk under the dried leaves on the forest floor as the sun was coming through the forest. Then all of a sudden the sun stepped on Biden right in the middle of the snake's belly. And that old snake reared up and bit the sun right in his heel. The sun's blood gushed out and seeped down the earth. It went down the depths where there's ever burning fire. And there his blood was forged into treasure beyond imagination. It was churned back up into this very mountain. People have been looking for it ever since because whoever finds it, they say, gets to live forever. The boys' eyes fixed on Judson, mesmerized at his tale. They absent-mindedly ate their food as they listened. What happened to the son? Johann asked. Oh, he died, Judson replied and took a bite of stew. Course, legend has it he didn't stay dead. He took a gulp from his cup and wiped the liquid that dribbled down his chin with the back of his arm. They say the Great One raised his son up and left the treasure for anyone who would find it, but Biden gathered up all the treasure and locked it in a cell he built in the mountain, and he hung the keys on his belt. After the Great One raised his son, just before he took him back to the heavenlies, the son snatched the keys from Biden. They say the son gives the keys to anyone who asks so they can get the treasure, as there's plenty enough for everybody on account he lost so much blood and all. But Biden's real mad about that. So to this day, he goes about trying to destroy anyone who gets a notion to find the treasure. Judson pushed back from the table, grabbing his pipe. He reached for a long stick by the hearth, which he stuck into the fire, then touched the end of the flaming stick to the tobacco in his pipe. He puffed until the bowl of his pipe glowed and threw the stick back into the fire. So you see, boys, it's just a bedtime story designed to scare little children, if you ask me. Oh, Papa, you're gonna give these poor boys nightmares. Kennard began clearing the plates. Let's all move our chairs to the fire where it's warm, where I can get candied figs. You boys like candied figs? Kennard waddled to an alcove in the far wall that served as a kitchen. The men arranged the chairs in a semicircle before the hearth. Medwin poured some more cider into his cup, then took his seat by the hearth. He slid back onto his chair, crossing one foot over the other knee, trying to make himself comfortable. Johann turned his chair backwards and straddled it. He draped his arms over the back of his chair and rested his chin on his hands. What makes you so sure it's just a children's story? He directed his question to Judson, but he stared into the fire. Oh, you don't need no treasure to give you power, Johann. You got all the power you ever need right here. He tapped his finger on the side of his head. Mind power, intellect. Michael sat on the edge of his chair and leaned forward, holding his cup in his hands. Well, I know one thing. The good master is real. We know him. He gave us these. Michael unsheathed his little sword to show Judson. What's that little thing supposed to do you for? Judson said in disgust. Well, it's sharp, and it's two-edged. It cuts things, for protection, Michael explained, replacing the short sword in its sheath. Boy, that couldn't protect you from a gnat. Or a pear, Johann murmured into his cup. Both boys looked at each other and shrugged. Do you even know how to use it? Judson asked. Not so much, but we're learning, Johann answered. So you've never met the good master? I told you he don't exist. Judson reached out and grabbed the hilt of Michael's little sword and pulled it out of its sheath. Before either boy could speak, Judson grasped the blade between his thumb and forefinger and bent the blade down. The blade, which had been stiff and sharp in Michael's hand, now wriggled like rubber before Judson. Where'd you say you got this toy? Judson replaced the blade in Michael's sheath. Kennard entered with a platter of candied figs and began passing them around. Well, I believe he exists. I've heard some people in town talking about him. I think he sounds like a real nice man. But what I don't understand is how is you have to be looking for that blasted treasure they say to meet him. Oh, that don't seem fair. Seems you want to meet a person, you ought to be able to just meet him any old way. Well, I don't need to meet him because I don't need his old treasure. What's it going to do for me that I can't do for myself? Judson looked at Medwin. Medwin looked at Michael. Johann followed Medwin's gaze and looked into his friend's eyes. It was probably just the reflection from the fire, but they sparkled. Michael's eyes actually sparkled. He has much more to offer than what people think, Michael exclaimed. The treasure is not riches. You said it yourself, Judson. It was forged with the son's blood. There's got to be incredible power there. Power so that we can't ever be destroyed. He must have loved his people an awful lot to try to save them like that. I believe the story is true. Bunch of poppycock, if you ask me. I believe what I can see. Medwin took a deep breath and looked up at the ceiling. He exhaled deeply and cleared his throat. Judson, do a little something for me. Oh, sure thing, my friend. Take a deep breath and hold it. Judson filled his lungs and held his breath. That's right, just hold it. Everyone watched the round man expectantly. Keep holding it. Judson began to redden. His eyes bulged slightly. Keep holding it. His cheeks puffed out. Finally, he opened his mouth and gasped for air. I didn't say breathe yet, Medwin scolded. Well, dab blame if you want me to suffocate. I had to take a breath. Judson inhaled again. A breath of what? Medwin asked. Why, a breath of air. How else would I be breathing? Well, I don't see any air. Michael smiled. That's right. How'd you know there's air? You can't see it. Well, I can sure see what it does to me when I don't have it. Medwin smiled and nodded to Michael to continue. Well, yeah, but you trust that the air is there, right? Even though you can't see it, you believe it's all around. We can't see it, but apparently it fills this room. What if? Michael searched for a point to make. Johann understood what Michael was trying to say and spoke up. What if all the air in this room moved up to the corner of that ceiling? Then we'd all suffocate. But does anyone believe that will happen? No. We believe the air is going to stay all around us even though we can't see it. Johann smiled triumphantly. Medwin nodded approvingly and Michael grinned. Well, I don't need no fairy tale treasure and invisible good master to breathe air. Medwin's countenance fell and he shook his head. Johann pondered Judson's statement. Oh, boys, it's getting late, Caynard announced. I'll have your rooms ready. Medwin, you know where your room is. Boys, you're right in here. She picked up a small oil lamp from the table and opened a door in the far wall. The boys bid Judson and Medwin a good night and followed Kennard. The small room held two straw beds on wood frames with a small wooden table between. She set the oil lamp on this table. It's not fancy, but hopefully it will afford you a good night's sleep so you can continue your journey. The boys thanked her. Michael sat down on one bed and began unlacing his boots. Hand-stitched quilts were draped on the end of each bed. Michael pulled the quilt over him as he laid down. Johann wrapped his quilt about his shoulders as he sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots. The straw mattresses were firm but softer than the ground. Johann reached for the lamp. As he turned the flame down, he said, "Well, good night. Breathe easy." Chapter 19. Seeds, Soldiers, and Sufferings. "Oh, but master, they're in Charlottetown. Isn't that good?" Milligrubb slunk deeper in his chair. Abernathy Sullivan paced before him, shaking his head. "Hardly good enough, you mindless cretin. They might confuse him for a minute. Confusion works on lazy people. This boy wants answers. I can see it in his eyes. And he's not lazy. Selfish, maybe, but not lazy. He'll keep questioning till he finds his answers, until he finds the treasure. I cannot allow that to happen." "Oh, of course," Milligrubb snickered. The cold rock walls of Abernathy's room glistened in the flicker of the lamp. Milligrubb shivered as he sat on the hard wooden chair. The room was as cold as the ashes in the hearth that hid behind cobwebs. But he knew better than to suggest lighting a fire. The last time he interrupted his master's thoughts with a plea for his own comfort, his head discovered just how hard a cave wall really was. The lump on his temple didn't subside for days. So the little creature attempted to warm himself by rubbing his hairy little hands together, then crossing his arms in front of his little belly. Abernathy Sullivan continued to pace back and forth, ruminating over the problem. If they weren't so inquisitive, apathy would work. Nah, apathy is best for old people. I love it when they get tired and fed up, don't you? Milligrubb nodded enthusiastically. Abernathy Sullivan contemplated further. Knowledge? Nah, he's not that motivated. He'll never do the work required to get knowledge. But I do so love it when they fill themselves with facts and no understanding. Oh, those are the easiest to subvert. Don't you think? But this one's not going to be easy. Not at all. Oh, then what can we do? We'll attack his weakness. Master, isn't that what you did with Michael? Remember the fearmonger? It seems that it didn't turn out too well for you then." Abernathy's glare was enough to shut Milligrubb's mouth. He turned his back on the creature and began searching through dusty bottles that lined the shelves. Milligrubb let out a silent sigh and began patting his fist against his forehead. "Ixnay on the Eichel may talk," he whispered to himself. Abernathy picked up a brown bottle. Greed? Nah, that's what's driving him now. If it weren't for his greed, he wouldn't even be here. He stepped back and folded his arms across his ponderous stomach. He brought one finger to his mouth and tapped it contemplatively. "Doubt, always good," Abernathy said as he reached for a jar of seeds on the shelf above his head. He opened the jar and poured a few seeds into his palm. He picked up one of the large brown seeds and displayed it between his thumb and forefinger before Milligrubb. "One seed of doubt, rightly planted, and I'll have that boy running back to his little village faster than—" His brow furrowed in thought. "Faster than— corn through a goose? What? No, faster than that." Abernathy put a few seeds in the pocket of his vest. Oh, faster than a cat in a dog pen? Millie Grub grinned up the old man. Shut up! Abernathy shuffled to the passage that led out of his chamber. Millie Grub hopped down from his chair and waddled after him. Faster than grease in a hot skillet? Faster than... Johann awoke to a soft rapping on the door. He pulled the blanket back from his head and peered out. Sunlight beamed through the bare window. He glanced at Michael, who was still sound asleep on his back and snoring. The door slowly opened, and Kennard peeked in. You boys ready for breakfast? I got some nice side meat frying, cakes on the griddle, and some fresh eggs waiting for you. The aroma wafted in, causing Michael to sit straight up even before he awakened. The boys lost no time washing up before breakfast and presented themselves at the table with clean hands and tousled hair. Judson lumbered in from the front porch. Morning, boys. Medwin said to tell you he had to be off. Places to go, people to see, that sort of thing. But you eat up hearty. He sat down at the table, and Kennard poured him a fresh cup of coffee. He held the cup and gently blew over the hot liquid. You boys still intend on this treasure hunt? Johann nodded as he gobbled his food. Well, I think you're wasting your time. You ain't gonna find nothing on this mountain that you can't find anywhere else. But it's your little expedition. I guess boys need to discover these things for themselves. He slurped his coffee. Daggum, she can get coffee hotter than molten lava. What's that, Judson? Kennard called. She was standing by the hearth preparing extra griddle cakes. I said, your coffee is better all the Java. He hollered back at her. She grinned and winked at the boys. After breakfast, Kennard gave each boy a parcel tied with a string. In case you boys get hungry along the way. They put their parcels in their packs and readied themselves for their journey. Kennard hugged their necks, and Judson clapped their hands on their shoulders. Well, be safe, boys, he said, and if you're ever back this way, you're welcome at our table. The boys thanked the couple for their hospitality and proceeded down the path. Once out of the village, the path stretched through a field of green grass that carpeted the side of the mountain. The wildflowers were in bloom, and it looked like someone had spilled paints all over the field. Splotches of yellow and white appeared amid strokes of blue and purple. Dark red dotted the tapestry here and there. The boys proceeded up the path. While Michael gazed at the beauty before him, Johann looked back down the path at Charlottetown. He reached into his shirt for his golden whistle. Michael glanced at him. What are you doing? Johann put the whistle to his lips, closed his eyes, and was about to blow. Then he stopped. He's real, Michael, right? Of course he is. Don't let Judson get to you. He just doesn't know him. Johann continued to twirl the whistle on the golden chain. Ahead, the path inclined to a clump of dark trees, then curved around to the right. As they walked toward the dark trees, a man appeared from around the curve, walking toward them, murmuring to himself. He held a scroll in one hand and a dark flat stone in the other. He walked with short, quick steps with his head down. He muttered incoherently as he walked, and would have walked straight into Johann had the boy not caught his attention by clearing his throat. The man stopped abruptly and looked up. Beg your pardon, sirs. He looked around suspiciously, then at Johann and Michael. From where do you hail? I recognize you not. From the village, Johann replied, nodding his head to the left to indicate their village, which could barely be seen on the far horizon. Be ye Lamarenthians? The man asked, frowning. No, I don't think so. Do ye camp with the Gadmians, then? He said in a sideways glance. Who are you talking about? Michael asked. The enemies. You mean the Willbenders? The boys asked in unison. Whatever in the unknown's name speak ye of? I've not heard of such ones as they. I speak of the enemies of the unknown's name. What is the unknown's name? No one knows. That's why it's unknown. Ah, but I be on a quest to find the unknown and discover his rightful name. Only then may I be privy to all his treasure. Are you looking for the treasure then? Johann asked. The man clutched his scroll and stone close to his chest and looked with disdain at the two boys. He sniffed, then grimaced, as if they were slightly malodorous. I'm Johann, the boy offered and nodded to his friend. This is Michael. Michael nodded his hello. The man raised his chin slightly. Nelson. Well, Nelson, what's that you got? It's an ancient scroll, he said excitingly, and promptly plopped down in the middle of the path, cross-legged. He unrolled the scroll a bit and placed the flat stone in the middle of the parchment. The stone was about the size of a dinner plate and contained all manner of curious engraved symbols. This is the key to unlocking the code of the scroll, which contains the true name of the keeper. Only he who calls on his true name shall be shown the treasure, he explained. Are you talking about the good master? Johann asked. So you are, Gadmian, he accused. What? No, I'm just a villager from the village. Let me show you. Nelson perused the scroll, bending close to its script. It contained strange symbols neatly calligraphed in ink on yellow parchment. You see, look here. The boys sat cross-legged across from Nelson and leaned forward to peer at the curious marks. There were no recognizable letters, but only strange little shapes, curls and squiggles. Neatly drawn vines graced the margins, giving the document a pleasant border. Yeah, what are we looking at? Michael asked. Don't you see, in the language of the Calderons, there was no G. How could he possibly be called the Good Master? Because there is a G in our language? You just don't get it. Unless you call it his true name, which no one knows, you can't find him. And if you can't find him, you can't find the treasure. Well, if no one knows his true name, how in the world can you know? Forget it. I could settle this right now. Johann reached again for his whistle and blew. Nelson, hearing no sound, paid no attention and continued muttering about letters and pored over his ancient script. Finally, he picked up his stone, rolled up his scroll, and stood up. Good Master stood behind him, the corners of his mouth betraying a slight amusement. So there you have it. Your name originally meant a herder of animals. Animals! Can you believe it? You must study to find the true name so you can call on him. Well, I'll be gone now. Good day. He tipped his head and stepped between the boys. Johann's mouth gaped as he pointed to the good master. But you... He scrambled to get to his feet as Nelson continued down the path, but his heavy pack made it difficult to stand up. He and Michael braced each other, trying to balance themselves and stand. Goodmaster threw back his head and laughed, then hoisted them both up by their arms. Nelson! Johann called after him. Goodmaster is right here! But the man did not hear him and kept walking. Johann looked at Goodmaster. Can you believe that guy? He made my head spin. You should go talk to him and Kennard and Judson. They don't believe you exist. But if you just go talk to them, they'll know. Unfortunately, they wouldn't because they're engulfed in Abdian's bubble. What's that? Goodmaster turned Johann around, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. Look again and see. Johann peered at the figure walking away from them. As he watched, the air around Nelson shimmered and a transparent, iridescent sphere materialized around him. He was walking in what looked like a giant soap bubble. That's why he can't understand you, Johann. Well, just go pop it, Johann reasoned. You're the one who must do that. But how? With your two-edged sword. It's very powerful. Johann looked at Goodmaster, then trotted after Nelson. As he got closer, Johann unsheathed his little weapon and stabbed the bubble. The bubble yielded to the point of the sword, then pushed back, knocking Johann's sword out of his hand. Nelson, oblivious to the activity around him, kept walking, kept muttering to himself. Johann picked up his sword and ran back to Goodmaster. Are you kidding? This thing couldn't pierce butter. What happened to it? Have you boys been practicing as I taught you? The boys shuffled their feet and hung their heads as they gave their excuses simultaneously. Well, there was this tree, and we've been pretty busy. No, a bush, really. Well, maybe it was a tree. There hasn't been that much time. It had fruit. And Goodmaster shook his head, took Johann's sword, and felt the tip with his thumb. Just what I thought. Dull. Well, boys, there's only one thing to do. You must sharpen them. Johann perked up. That sounded easy enough. He sharpened Widow McCrae's knives all the time. He began looking around for a good sharpening stone. You won't find a sharpening stone here, the man said. They must be sharpened on the stone of suffering. Oh, I don't like the sound of that, Johann said. Is mine dull too? Michael asked, holding his sword up with a hopeful look. I'm afraid so. They both need sharpening. It's very important too, because as long as you let the blades remain like this, people like Nelson and Judson and Caynard continue as they are. They only trust in their knowledge or what they can see. They never want to know any other way. Goodmaster turned around and pointed up the path. You'll have to go this way, up to the stone of suffering. The boys noticed a fork in the path. They looked at each other, then hung their heads, as they often did when embarking toward some punishment that had been exacted upon them. Usually it was extra chores or repairing the damage caused by one of Johann's pranks. Fortunately, fences were easy to mend. Probably the worst was the mess they had to clean up at Whitaker's store when Gowan's pig ran amok through the vegetable stand. But this stone of suffering sounded threatening. Are you sure we're going the right way, Goodmaster? Johann asked. Goodmaster smiled. Yes, Johann, you're going the right way. How will we recognize the stone? Michael asked. Oh, you'll know it. Up ahead, the path will become hard, though. If you come upon trouble, watch closely. I've left you a way of escape. He embraced each boy, stepped into the shadows, and was gone. The boys adjusted their packs and readied themselves for a long walk. Michael pulled Caynard's parcel from Johann's pack, and the two shared the food as they walked. Let's play a game, Michael said. Let's play the alphabet game in honor of Nelson and his letters. I'll start. A. He looked around for something that began with an A. Acorn, he said triumphantly, kicked an acorn from the path. Johann wanted to clear his mind of the danger he felt looming before them, and he didn't want to play any children's games. He thought about Nelson and his fascination with letters. Bird, he finally said, pointing up, but still looking at the path ahead. Hey, that's not fair. There are birds everywhere. You got to be more specific, and you have to see it. Okay. Johann paused and looked up into the trees that lined the side of the path. Blue jay. That's better. Let's see. C. Michael surveyed the blue sky. One white cloud floated above the valley. Cloud. Dogwood. Johann pointed to the small tree growing in the shadow of the pines, its delicate white flowers just beginning to bloom on its thin, twisted branches. E. Michael looked on either side of the path as they walked. E. E! A screech filled the valley. The boys stopped and looked at each other. Eee! They looked up and saw two large eagles circling high above them. Eagle! Michael smiled. The path began a gradual descent as it turned to the right into the forest. Forest, Johann announced. By the time they were to W, they had been walking for hours and were getting tired. Johann thought he heard rushing water ahead. Water, W, and just in time. They hurried ahead and found a river rushing over boulders. The boys ran to the bank, dropped their packs, and knelt by the cool water. They drank deeply and refilled their flagons. While they were busy at the water's edge, with their backs to the forest, shadows began moving among the trees. Stealthily, 8 bedraggled tree soldiers moved into what should have been attack formation among the forest trees, but their ranks were sparse and uneven. Each soldier was covered in splotches of mud and dangling vines. Their wooden breastplates were splintered and cracked. One soldier's helmet hung sideways, the nosepiece protecting his ear. Another limped into position. One soldier acted as commander. He was the least disheveled, but clearly had not fared well since their unfortunate mission at Broken Pass. He motioned the others to move forward. Silently, they proceeded in syncopated unison as they limped and dragged themselves toward the boys at the bank. Michael was the first to notice the movement from the corner of his eye. "Johann, look out!" Michael wheeled around and grabbed his sword, ready to fight. Johann fumbled on his knees, attempting to unsheathe the sword and stand up. He stood in position just in time to see a man who looked strangely like a cypress tree level a splintered spear toward him. The tree man brought his arm back, ready to throw his spear. The movement caused the metal point to fall off. He looked down in dumb silence. His long wooden breastplate clearly prevented him from bending over, so as he looked at Johann and threw his big stick, Johann raised his sword to block the projectile. It shattered into 1,000 large splinters. The other soldiers advanced, slowly and cautiously. They looked nervously at each other, raising spears which were splintered, bent, or broken. As one soldier raised his spear overhead, it broke in two and hit his neighboring comrade in the head, knocking him to the ground. The boys watched the advance with fear and a small amount of amusement. Suddenly, Johann screamed like the eagle and ran toward the soldiers, wielding his sword. Michael followed his friend's example, but screamed more like a little girl than a mighty eagle. Nonetheless, splinters were flying as they ran among the soldiers, hitting the spears with their swords. The soldiers began to shake nervously, unsure how to proceed. Then a great growl blasted through the trees. The soldiers scrambled round, running into each other as Michael and Johann ran back to the riverbank. The soldiers formed ranks again and marched forward. Johann saw a small boat in a clump of weeds at the bank. He called Michael to help him get it into the water. They maneuvered the boat into the river, threw in their packs, and jumped in just as one wooden soldier grabbed for Johann's shoulder. He missed and fell face down in the muddy bank. The other soldiers were piling up behind him as they slipped and slid on the bank. Johann laughed as their attackers formed a wooden pile. Michael looked around the boat for oars, but there were none. The current carried the boat swiftly down the river. Luckily, there were no more boulders. The boys each grabbed their packs, pulled them over their shoulders, and buckled them securely. The rushing water was growing louder and the current faster the further they floated down the river. Johann began to think the river would take them back to their village and deposit them in front of gawking villagers, defeated and empty-handed. But then he realized a much worse fate awaited them when he heard a deafening rush of water. Ahead, the river dropped over massive falls. In a matter of seconds, they would be plunged who knew how far. He looked back at Michael, whose colorless face showed he was clearly aware of their fate. Johann wanted to apologize. Suddenly, the treasure didn't seem so important. He felt the front of the boat drop as it shot over the falls. He closed his eyes and held his breath. He heard Michael's screams behind him. Now Michael sounded like those eagles. Oh, Johann waited for the end. How could he still be hanging in midair? How could Michael still be screaming like an eagle? He and his friend should be dead by now, drowned in the water that was still far below them. Johann realized he was no longer in the boat. He opened his eyes. He was moving in the air. He looked up. A massive creature clutched Johann's backpack with impossibly large talons, carrying him through the sky. This was no eagle. Now Johann could distinguish Michael's screams from the creature's brave calls. From the sound of Michael's piercing cries, Johann knew an enormous creature carried him also. The giant bird monsters swooped down toward a cleft in the mountain and dropped their prey about 5 feet into a massive nest. The boys tumbled into a nest and scrambled around, cowering against a jumble of hard branches for safety. They watched the winged creatures soar off. "That's a really big bird," Johann finally squeaked. Relieved they were still alive and unharmed, they crawled to the edge of the nest. It was built in the sheer side of a cliff. They peered over the edge into a bottomless chasm, then scrambled to the other side. This side was fashioned into the mountain. "Come on," Michael said. "We need to get out of here. They may have caught us for an afternoon snack." "Yeah," Johann agreed. They climbed out of the nest and over large boulders until they were on the level ground of the mountain and headed for the forest. They walked through the woods, but saw no path. The woods were so dense and dark with foliage, they had no idea what time of day it was. Pale light filtered through the leaves at times, making the forest floor seem smoky. "What were those tree soldiers?" Johann asked. Michael shrugged and grunted. "I don't know. At least our swords were sharp enough for them, but we better get to that stone." They trudged on with deliberate steps. Johann yawned. Michael wiped his eyes. "Johann, I'm so tired I can hardly keep my eyes open," Michael said. Johann replied with a big yawn. Their steps became slower until both boys, weary and shaken, stopped at the same time. They untied their packs and fell to the ground. Michael put his head on his pack. 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes, Michael said and closed his eyes. Yeah, 15. Johann curled up against his pack. Both boys were sound asleep in seconds. Abernathy Sullivan stepped out of the shadows into the smoky haze of the forest floor. He bent over Johann and reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out one large brown seed and slid it in to Johann's ear. Johann reached up and scratched his ear, but slumbered on. Abernathy grinned and slipped back into the shadows. All right. We will stop here. We are so close. We'll have 6 chapters for our last one, but the story is getting really good. And our next session will end it. So, yes, thanks for joining us and have a good night.